First contact shock. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood at the helm of the UES Resilient, watching the massive alien fleet materialize from quantum space. The ships were beautiful, all sweeping lines and gleaming surfaces that seemed to defy physics. But Elena's attention was on their weapon configurations, or rather, the lack thereof. "Ma'am, we're being hailed," Lieutenant Park announced from his station. "They're identifying themselves as the Aegis Alliance." Elena straightened her uniform. First contact. Again. This was humanity's third encounter with an alien civilization this year, and each one had ended the same way, with baffled aliens and lengthy discussions about human ship design. "On screen," she ordered. The alien that appeared was humanoid, with iridescent scales and compound eyes that shimmered like opals. "Greetings, Earth vessel. I am High Admiral Vexthor of the Aegis Alliance. The alien paused, their compound eyes widening as sensor data presumably reached them. "Your ship. There must be an error in our readings." Elena suppressed a sigh. "Here we go again." "No error, High Admiral. The Resilient is a standard Earth exploration vessel." "Standard." Vexthor's scales shifted color in what Elena's scanology training suggested was distress. "Your ship has triple redundant life support systems, quadruple layered hull plating, multiple backup power cores, enough point defense systems to repel an asteroid field. This is a civilian science vessel." "Of course," Elena replied. "Space is dangerous, High Admiral. We believe in being prepared." "Prepared." Vexthor's scales now pulsed with patterns that indicated deep concern. "Captain Rodriguez, your civilian vessel has more defensive capabilities than our dedicated warships. The energy readings from your backup systems alone exceed our safety protocols." Elena thought about Earth's history, about all the times humanity had nearly wiped itself out, about all the lessons written in blood and fire and extinction-level events narrowly avoided, about how those lessons had shaped every aspect of human engineering, especially once they reached the stars. "High Admiral, perhaps we should discuss this in person. There's something you need to understand about humanity's approach to survival." The meeting took place aboard the Resilient, much to the Alliance delegation's visible discomfort. Elena watched as their engineers studied the ship's schematics with growing alarm. These redundancies, their chief engineer, a being named Zix, gestured at the holographic display. "They'd make no sense. Why build backup systems for the backup systems?" "Because we've learned that anything that can fail will fail," Elena explained, "usually at the worst possible moment." "But the resource cost," Zix protested, "is nothing compared to the cost of losing a ship and her crew." Elena finished. "Every human ship is built with one fundamental principle: survival at all costs." Vexthor, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "Your species builds civilian vessels to military specifications because you assume the worst will happen." "We don't assume, High Admiral. We know. Humanity has faced extinction multiple times. We've fought ourselves, our environment, our own creations. Each time, we survived because we learned to prepare for anything." The alien delegation exchanged looks that Elena's training couldn't interpret. Finally, Vexthor spoke again, their voice carrying a new tone, something between fear and respect. "Captain Rodriguez, we came here today hoping to establish diplomatic relations with Earth. Now, I fear we must report back that we've discovered something unprecedented, a species whose basic safety standards exceed our military capabilities." Elena smiled diplomatically. "Or perhaps you've discovered potential allies who've learned the hard way how to survive anything the universe throws at us." As the delegation departed, Elena couldn't help but notice how their ships maintained a slightly larger distance than standard diplomatic protocol suggested. Fear or respect. It was often hard to tell the difference when dealing with alien species. What she did know was that humanity's reputation would spread through the galaxy. The species that built their ships to survive apocalypses, just in case. The species that considered multiple redundancies basic safety features. The species that had learned, through near extinction after near extinction, that survival meant preparing for the worst. Little did she know that this reputation would soon make humanity the galaxy's last, best hope against a threat that would put all those redundancies to the test. The swarm approaches. 3 months after first contact, Alina found herself standing in Earth's Central Command, facing a room full of grim-faced admirals and an even grimmer-looking Aegis Alliance delegation. The holographic display dominating the center of the room showed a mass of red dots spreading across the galaxy like a virus. They call themselves the Nexus, High Admiral Vexthor explained, their scales a muted gray of desperation, a collective consciousness controlling billions of biomechanical vessels. They don't negotiate. They don't retreat. They simply consume and convert. Admiral Chen, Earth's highest-ranking fleet commander, studied the tactical display. Your reports indicate they've overwhelmed 3 Alliance defense fleets. How? Our ships. Vexthor's scales rippled with shame. They're built to Nova Protocol standards. Clean, efficient, minimal ecological impact. Against conventional threats, they're more than adequate. But the Nexus, they gestured at the display. They just keep coming. When our ships lose their primary systems, they're disabled. When their ships lose systems, they keep fighting. Like they're built to human standards. Alina finished quietly. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Alliance's environmentally conscious, efficiently designed ships were beautiful, advanced, and utterly unprepared for an enemy that didn't play by civilized rules. Show us their attack patterns, Chen ordered. The holographic display shifted, showing footage from battles. The Nexus ships were ugly, asymmetrical things that moved like a swarm of locusts. They didn't bother with fancy maneuvers or complex tactics. They simply overwhelmed their targets with sheer numbers and persistence. They don't fear death, Vexthor explained. They don't even seem to understand the concept. Each ship is just a cell in their collective body. Lose one, grow 2 more. Alina watched the footage, something clicking in her mind. They're like a virus, she said suddenly. And we humans, we've got a pretty good track record with developing immunities. Chen turned to her. Elaborate, Captain. The Alliance builds ships like they're in a perfect world. We build ships like we're expecting everything to go wrong. The Nexus doesn't care about damage because they operate like a virus, overwhelming through numbers. But what if we could make each loss cost them more than they can afford to pay? The tactical display shifted again, showing the Nexus's advance toward Alliance space and Earth. They had maybe 2 months before the swarm reached populated systems. High Admiral, Chen addressed Vexthor. You came here because our ships frightened you with their excessive survivability and combat capability. Now I'm going to show you why we build them that way. The next hour was a crash course in humanity's approach to warfare, not the clean, efficient combat the Alliance practiced, but the messy, desperate kind that humans had perfected over centuries of trying to wipe themselves out. We'll need to retrofit civilian ships, Chen continued. Every freighter, every mining vessel, every space station, they already have the basic framework, multiple redundancies, oversized power cores, reinforced hulls. We just need to wake up their sleeping dragons. Retrofit civilian vessels for combat. Vexthor's scales shifted through patterns of shock. That's not possible. The regulations alone. High Admiral. Alina interrupted gently. I don't think you understand. Every human ship, every station, every space-worthy construction we build already has the potential for combat operations built in. We just don't advertise it. The Alliance delegation stared at her in horror as she continued. Those excessive power cores, they're rated to handle weapon systems. Those redundant shield generators, they can be reconfigured into offensive screens. Those oversized engines, they're built to handle combat maneuvers. We build everything this way because we learned a long time ago that you never know when you'll need to fight for survival. Admiral Chen nodded. Captain Rodriguez will lead the first Joint Task Force. Her experience with Alliance protocols will be valuable in coordinating our forces. As the meeting concluded, Alina caught Vexthor looking at her differently, not with fear or confusion, but with desperate hope. "Your species," they said quietly, "you built for war even in peacetime." Alina shook her head. "No, High Admiral. We built for survival. There's a difference. We're about to show you what happens when humanity has something worth fighting for." As she left the command center, Alina couldn't help but smile grimly. The galaxy was about to learn why humans wrap their ships in layers of redundancies and backup systems. They weren't preparing for war. They were preparing for survival. And now, facing an enemy that threatened not just humanity but all sentient life, those preparations would finally serve their true purpose. Operation Thunderstrike. The UES Resilient hung in space alongside what had once been a civilian mining fleet. Alina barely recognized the ships now. In just 6 weeks, humanity had transformed its civilian vessels into something unprecedented in galactic warfare. Mining laser arrays reconfigured to military frequencies, her chief engineer, Commander Santos, reported with pride. Those deep core drills they used for asteroid mining. Turns out they make excellent capital ship-piercing weapons, and all those reinforced cargo bays, perfect for missile tubes. Alina watched through the viewport as crew teams conducted final checks on the external modifications. The ships looked ugly now. Their once smooth hulls bristling with weapons, their elegant lines broken up by additional armor plating. But they weren't built for beauty anymore. "Status report on the Alliance contingent?" she asked. "Still adapting to our modifications," Santos replied. "They're struggling with the concept of controlled overload in their power systems, the idea of purposely pushing equipment beyond safety limits." He shook his head. "It's like teaching birds to swim." The comm system crackled. "Captain, High Admiral Vexthor requests your presence in the tactical room." Alina found the Alliance commander staring at display screens showing the approaching Nexus swarm. Their scales had taken on a deep blue tint that Alina had learned indicated deep thought. "Your species," Vexthor said without preamble, "continues to confound us. We've spent the last week watching you transform mining ships into warships, cargo haulers into missile platforms, and research vessels into electronic warfare centers. How is this possible?" Alina smiled. "Because we built them that way from the start. Every human ship is built with the assumption that one day it might need to fight. We just hide it better in peacetime. But the waste of resources isn't waste if it keeps you alive." Alina interrupted. "You're about to see why." The tactical display updated, showing the first wave of the Nexus swarm entering the system, right on schedule. "All ships, battle stations," Alina commanded. "Execute Operation Thunderstrike." What followed would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. The converted mining fleet, led by the Resilient, demonstrated warfare as only humans could imagine it. Former mining ships used their reinforced hulls to ram straight through Nexus formations, their mining lasers, now modified to military frequencies, cutting swaths through enemy ranks. Cargo ships revealed missile batteries hidden in their cargo bays, overwhelming Nexus point defenses with sheer volume of fire. Research vessels, their sensitive scanning equipment repurposed for electronic warfare, created chaos in the swarm's collective consciousness. But it was the redundancies, the wasteful human approach to engineering, that truly proved their worth. When Nexus weapons breached their hulls, human ships kept fighting. When primary systems failed, backups kicked in instantly. When backup systems failed, emergency systems took over. "Impossible," Vexthor whispered, watching a heavily damaged human freighter continue fighting despite losing half its hull. "By every known standard of ship design, these vessels should be crippled. Human standards are different," Alina replied, directing the Resilient through a particularly dense cluster of enemy ships. "We learned a long time ago that survival isn't about preventing damage. It's about continuing to function after taking it. The battle raged for hours. Human ships, their excessive power cores purposely pushed beyond safety limits, unleashed devastating energy weapons. Their redundant shield systems, reconfigured into offensive configurations, created invisible walls that sliced through Nexus ships like hot knives through butter. But it was the psychological impact that proved most decisive. The Nexus, used to enemies that retreated when damaged, seemed unable to adapt to ships that fought harder the more damaged they became. Each human vessel, drawing on centuries of learning how to survive against all odds, became a lesson in persistence. "They're retreating," Santos announced, disbelief in his voice. "The swarm, they're actually retreating." Elena watched the tactical display as the remaining Nexus ships began a withdrawal. They had won this battle, but she knew it was only the beginning. The swarm would adapt, learn, come back stronger. But now, they knew what they were facing. A species that had turned survival into an art form. "High Admiral," she turned to Vexthor, "I believe this demonstrates why we build our ships the way we do." The alien commander's scales had shifted to a color Elena had never seen before. "Your species," they said slowly, "doesn't build ships for war or peace. You build them for endurance, for survival against any odds." They paused. "We called your designs wasteful. We were wrong. They are necessary." Elena nodded. "The universe is a dangerous place, High Admiral. Humanity learned that lesson long ago. Now we just have to teach it to the Nexus." The breaking point. 2 weeks after Operation Thunderstrike's success, Elena stared at sensor readings that made her blood run cold. The Nexus hadn't just adapted, they had evolved. The swarm returning to Alliance space was different, having incorporated aspects of both human and Alliance technology into their biomechanical ships. "They're learning," she muttered, studying the tactical displays aboard the battle-scarred Resilient. "Just like we do." "Captain," Santos called from his station, his voice tight. "Long-range scans confirm it. They're using our own redundancy concepts against us. Multiple backup systems, layered defenses. They're copying our survival strategies." Elena felt a grim smile form. "But they're missing something fundamental about how humans fight." She opened a channel to the fleet. "All ships, this is Captain Rodriguez. The enemy has studied our playbook and thinks they understand how we survive. Let's show them why humanity's greatest strength isn't in our ship's designs. It's in our ability to adapt." The battle that followed would be remembered as the breaking point, the moment when both humanity and the Nexus discovered their true limits. The swarm attacked with terrible new efficiency, their ships now displaying the same stubborn refusal to die that had made human vessels so formidable. But they were fighting the species that had perfected survival through countless near extinctions, and humanity had one advantage the Nexus couldn't copy: imagination. Executing Protocol Lazarus, Elena announced as the first wave hit their lines. It was a desperate strategy, one that would have been impossible with conventional ship designs. Across the battlefield, human vessels began purposely overloading their systems, pushing their excessive power cores beyond even human safety limits. "They copied our redundancies," Elena explained to a horrified Vexthor, "but they don't understand why we built them this way. We don't just survive. We turn survival itself into a weapon." The Resilient shuddered as its primary power core went critical, exactly as planned. The energy surge cascaded through backup systems that weren't meant to contain it, creating a cascading reaction that turned the ship itself into a weapon. Across the battlefield, other human ships did the same, their wasteful backup systems becoming conduits for levels of power that violated the laws of engineering. "All ships, execute controlled overload patterns," Elena ordered. "Show them why humans build things to break in very specific ways." The Nexus swarm, for the first time, showed signs of confusion. They had copied human redundancy, but not human ingenuity. The ability to turn apparent destruction into a tactical advantage. Human ships, their systems pushed far beyond design limits, began to tear holes in space itself, creating temporary anomalies that ripped through Nexus formations. But the cost was devastating. Elena watched as human ships, their systems burned out by the controlled overloads, began to go dark. The Resilient's own hull groaned under stresses it was never meant to endure, even with all its over-engineering. Engineering reports critical failure in all backup systems, Santos reported, his voice steady despite the chaos. We're burning through redundancies faster than they can compensate. Good, Elena replied, surprising even herself with her calm. That's what they're for. We're not trying to survive this battle. We're trying to win it. The difference proved decisive. The Nexus, for all their adaptation, couldn't comprehend a species willing to deliberately sacrifice their precious redundancies as weapons. They had copied the engineering but not the philosophy behind it. The understanding that survival sometimes meant being willing to break yourself to break your enemy. Hours later, as rescue ships picked through the debris field that had once been two mighty fleets, Elena stood on her ruined bridge, surrounded by burned-out systems and emergency patches. The Resilient had survived, barely, but dozens of human ships had been lost, their final acts of sacrifice burning their names into history. Vexthor's voice came through a barely functioning comm system. Your ships, your people, you sacrificed your very survival mechanisms to achieve victory. No, Elena corrected, watching as emergency crews worked to salvage what they could. We proved why we build our ships with so many backup systems, not just to survive, but to choose how we use that survival. Sometimes victory requires sacrifice, but sacrifice doesn't mean defeat. It means choosing when and how to use everything you have, even your ability to endure. As she looked out at the battlefield, where human ingenuity had once again proved the difference between survival and extinction, Elena understood something fundamental about her species. Humans hadn't just built their ships to survive. They had built them to make survival itself a choice, a weapon, a strategy. And in doing so, they had taught the galaxy a lesson about what it truly meant to endure. A new dawn. 6 months after the Breaking Point battle, Elena stood in the Grand Chamber of the Aegis Alliance Council, surrounded by representatives from 100 spacefaring civilizations. The chamber, once a monument to efficient minimalism, now bore signs of human influence: redundant power systems, multiple emergency exits, reinforced walls. The galaxy was changing. The Nexus threat has been contained, High Admiral Vexthor announced to the assembled delegates, their scales shimmering with colors of pride and humility. But more importantly, we have learned lessons that will reshape our civilization. Holographic displays showed the new shipyards orbiting Alliance worlds. Gone were the sleek, efficient designs of the past. The vessels under construction now bore the distinctive marks of human influence: layered hulls, multiple redundancies, oversized power cores. We called humans wasteful, Vexthor continued. We saw their over-engineered ships as signs of paranoia or aggression. We were wrong. They weren't building for war. They were building for survival. And in doing so, they created something we had forgotten was possible: true resilience. Elena watched as technical specifications flowed across the displays. The Alliance wasn't just copying human designs. They were learning the philosophy behind them. Every new ship incorporated lessons learned from centuries of human near extinctions, each system built not just to function but to endure. Captain Rodriguez, Vexthor turned to her. Your species has transformed our understanding of survival. We no longer see redundancy as waste. We understand now that true efficiency isn't about using the minimum necessary resources. It's about ensuring continuation against all odds. Elena stood to address the council, remembering all the battles, all the sacrifices that had led to this moment. High Admiral, honored delegates, what you're seeing isn't just a change in ship design. It's a change in perspective. Humans don't build things to be unbreakable. We build them to be survivable when they do break. Because they will break. Everything does. The chamber was silent as she continued. The Nexus taught us all something important. They could copy our technology, our redundancies, our backup systems. But they couldn't copy the one thing that makes humanity truly resilient: our understanding that survival isn't about avoiding disaster. It's about getting back up after it hits. Across the galaxy, change was already spreading. Alliance worlds were retrofitting their infrastructure with human-inspired redundancies. Civilian ships were being rebuilt with survival in mind. Even space stations were being redesigned to human standards of resilience. "We are entering a new era," Vexthor declared. "One where we no longer build for peace or war, but for endurance." The human way isn't about preparing for conflict. It's about preparing for anything. As Elena listened to the council discuss the implementation of what they were calling the human survival protocols, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Humanity had entered the galactic stage feared for their over-engineered ships, only to become respected for the wisdom behind those designs. "Your species," a delegate from a distant system approached her after the session, "has given us something we didn't know we needed. Not weapons or shields or redundant systems, but a new way of thinking about survival itself." Elena smiled, thinking of all the times humanity had faced extinction and emerged stronger. "We learned our lessons the hard way," she replied. "Through fire and war and disaster. Each time we nearly wiped ourselves out, we learned something new about survival. Now those lessons will help protect the entire galaxy." As she prepared to return to the Resilient, now a symbol of this new philosophy, Elena reflected on how far they'd come. Humanity had entered the galactic community as apparent paranoid overbuilders, only to prove that their approach to survival was exactly what the galaxy needed. The universe was still dangerous. There would be other threats, other challenges, other moments when survival hung by a thread. But now, thanks to humanity's hard-learned lessons, the galaxy would face them with systems built to endure, with ships designed to survive, and with the understanding that true resilience comes not from avoiding failure, but from being prepared to face it head-on. The stars stretched out before them, full of both danger and promise, and humanity, once feared for their battle-ready ships, now stood as teachers of survival to a galaxy learning to endure.